Hello, everybody. All right, as I promised, I was going to do these short little summary videos or sort of little analysis things to help you kind of ground yourself in the text. Um, as close as we can, give some replication of, the discussions we have in class. And then from here, after you watch this, hopefully you will go onto the discussion boards and sort of continue the conversation. Before we get in, so we're talking about Beloved, right? You should have read, for those following at home, pages 1 through 110. That's where we are. So a good third of the book. I'm by no means a Toni Morrison expert or an expert on this novel. There's a ton out there on both her and this book specifically. It was a landmark book, came out in 1987 for Toni Morrison. This is before she won the Nobel Prize for Literature. But very important book in American literature. So people have been writing about it for years. There are all kinds of helpful videos actually on YouTube I was just watching. And videos of Morrison herself are definitely worth your time. She's super articulate and really kind of transparent about the process of writing this book, sort of how difficult it was for her, and kind of the emotional space that she had put herself in, and obviously why that would be difficult for someone to do. So I highly recommend you checking those out just on your own time. So in the portion that we read, the book opens with a quote from, So first off, it's dedicated to 60 million and more, a reference to all of those killed through the Atlantic slave trade system specifically. And then it has a quote from Scripture. This is Romans 9:25, and I will call them my people, which were not my people, and her beloved, which was not beloved. All right, so we don't need to spend too much time there, but if you're interested, that's Paul actually quoting the book of Hosea, and it represents a kind of reconciliatory moment between God and his people sort of all coming together. In the context of Romans 9, it's sort of talking about God's his choice, basically. I think this is neither here nor there, but I think it's interesting that this passage actually comes out of a really kind of complex argument that Paul is making in that book, in that chapter specifically, that raises a lot of issues about choice and free will in a lot of ways. Anyway, so that's how this book opens. So one of the things just setting, we're in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's like 1873. Our principal characters, we have Setha, which I'm pretty sure is how you say that name, her daughter Denver, who is like a young adult. I think she's 18. And then Paul D., who is and he shows up soon, one of the men from the plantation that Setha escaped from, Sweet Farm is what it's called. And then later we get Beloved, right? The character Beloved. So I'm trying to think. I have notes here, because I prepare extensively, as you're all familiar with. But okay, so we learned some things pretty quickly. We learn this house, 124, is haunted, and it's not. I guess there are ways that you could read this as like it's only a metaphor or whatever. But as a lover of the horror genre and ghost stories, I completely interpret all of these things pretty literally. So this is a ghost story. The house is haunted by Setha's child who was killed, and we don't know the context in which she was killed yet, although we learn, this is on page 6, if you have the paperback vintage international edition. On page 6, we learn that the child had its throat cut. Yeah, that's why it's so mad. And it's referred to as beloved because she didn't have time to say dearly beloved on the tombstone, so that's where that comes from. On top of course, the title also could be referring to the mysterious beloved character who, again, depending on sort of how you read the supernatural elements that are in this book, could be a variety of things, or perhaps not. I mean, again, I read the beloved woman that shows up as, a sort of as her daughter, basically. She literally has like a rebirth baptism scene. This book is very concerned or plays a lot with metaphor and kind of literalizing metaphors. There's that haunting, evocative description of the scars on her back like a tree. There's that sort of weirdly intimate moment between Paul D and her in the kitchen where he's kind of rubbing his face against her back. There's later on when she's telling the story or remembering the story of Denver's birth, and she's taken in by someone, the person recalls how it was like a rose that was blooming on her back because her wounds were opening up and she was bleeding everywhere. So there's this juxtaposition between these kind of really beautiful metaphors against something very horrific and tragic, and the process of coming to terms with the past is one of the things that this book is definitely about. This book is about memory, it's about storytelling, and it's about trauma and how all of these things are related and how the stories we tell each other affect us now in the present, and also who gets to tell the story, right? Because Beloved, when she comes back, reading her as Setha's daughter, her story wasn't told. That's why she is so that's why she wants to tell stories. And we'll look at some parts where her getting them to tell stories is actually kind of helping them process things. Like Denver starts to become more empathetic toward her mother as she sort of recalls the story of her own birth. But anyway, so just getting ahead. So Paul D shows up. We got Setha and Denver in the house. The house is haunted. Paul D and Setha sort of start a relationship. They, have a little family. Starts building. Paul D sort of like banishes the spirit. Like he tells it to go away, and it seems to go away. Denver's kind of upset about that because she kind of liked, the ghost baby around the house. They go to a carnival. There's this really, again, sort of beautiful moment where Setha sees their shadows holding hands. I don't know. I think that's really pretty. It's the first time she says that she's gone out to a social function in like 18 years. So significant. And then on their way back, this woman, Beloved, shows up. She says her entrance is kind of, this is on page 60. A fully dressed woman walked out of the water. She barely gained the dry bank of the stream before she sat down and leaned against the mulberry tree. Okay, and so then, so she walks out of the water. Okay, water, again, thinking through these kind of spiritual, in the spiritual realm that we're already introduced in with this opening of the New Testament scripture. Water is associated with, rebirth, baptism, all these things. So we have that going on. And then we also have when Setha sees her, she has to go to the bathroom very quickly. And almost like her water is breaking. And we get that scene is mirrored as she recalls again the past of Denver being born, which is the other thing that happens, the other kind of narrative thing. So we've got, this book can be hard to sort of follow. It's stream of consciousness. It's jumping back and forth across time and characters because it goes between the three principal characters. I think it's pretty clear if you kind of keep with it, but you do need to sort of pay attention. And you do have these parallel timelines going on. So we have the present with Setha and Paul D in Denver, and then Beloved shows up. And then, in at least what we read today, we get the background on Denver's birth. And Setha is recalling Denver's birth, which happened. She had run away. She was pregnant and she could barely walk. She's helped by this woman, Amy, a white woman, who helps her to the river, and she gives birth in this boat. And then Amy leaves, and then she's picked up by some other people on the river who help her get across to get to freedom. Okay. So that's kind of, that's Denver's birth. And again, Denver, like 18, I think. I don't know if I can't remember. I only know that because I read it online somewhere. But yeah, so the big thing to sort of really key in on is Beloved herself and how the other characters sort of interact and bounce off of her. So if we go to page 69, so there are all these clues that sort of key you in that, like, Beloved is that child. One of them being that she wants to hear about the earrings, her mom's earrings. And Denver actually figures out, she knows who it is, or at least she says, like, don't tell my mom, like, who you are. So on page 69, kind of like halfway through, just like down here, okay, following along. So it became a way to feed her, is telling her stories. Just as Denver discovered and relied on the delightful effect sweet things had on Beloved, Sethi learned the profound satisfaction Beloved got from storytelling. It amazed Setha as much as it pleased Beloved, because every mention of her past life hurt. Everything in it was painful or loss. And then if we skip down a couple lines, but as she began telling about the earring, she found herself wanting to, liking it. Perhaps it was Beloved's distance from the events itself, or her thirst for hearing it. In any case, it was an unexpected pleasure. And so Setha starts to open up. She tells the story about her mom, which is very tragic. This is all tragic, right? Who was hung, and there's a line, this is on 73, she was remembering something she'd forgotten she knew. Because for her, this trauma, this is a novel that is about trauma in a lot of ways. Honestly, all good ghost stories are about trauma, right? Like, that's why ghosts persist, in stories, is because of some traumatic happening. So Morrison is tapping into this genre and using it in a way that's specific to the Black experience in America and very evocative of it. If ghosts are created through trauma, how many ghosts were created through the trauma of the Atlantic slave trade. So she's telling these stories, and then Denver, and I just wanted to highlight this because I think it's important, when she's again recalling, Setha is asking her, or not Setha, Beloved's asking her again to say, tell me about when she made you in the boat or something like that. Hang on. It's on page 91. This is what the notes are for. Okay. Yeah, tell me how Setha made you in the boat. It's on 91, sort of down toward the bottom here. All right. So she's telling the story. Denver began to see what she was saying, and not just to hear it. There's this 19-year-old slave girl, a year older than herself. Oh, okay. There, 18. Walking through the dark woods to get to her children who are far away. A few lines down. Behind her dogs, perhaps. Guns, probably. And certainly mossy teeth. She is not so afraid at night because she is the color of it. But in the day, every sound is a shot or a tracker's quiet step. Denver was seeing it now and feeling it through Beloved, feeling how it must have felt to her mother. So this is a significant moment for Denver as far as like her own development as a character, because she's heard this story over and over and over and over. And it's only through, she says literally through Beloved, that she is starting to sort of better manifest sort of what her mom went through. Like she's having this almost sense experience of what it would have been like to be on the run, to be pregnant. So she's growing more empathetic, or at least, it's implied that she's growing more empathetic. And again, it's this process of storytelling that's doing it. So the power sort of imbued and embedded in our ability and capacity to remember and to tell our past. The novel's very concerned with memory and sort of how memory leaves traces on you, just like they leave traces on Setha's back, and how those things can sort of be interpreted a variety of ways, again, depending on who gets to tell the story. So, okay, I don't want to keep rambling, but those are the highlights of sort of what happens in this. We didn't even talk about, there's Baby Suggs, her sermon that we get at the very back end of this about loving your flesh is a significant moment. It's kind of her like Sermon on the Mount, although Morrison makes a point to say like she doesn't sort of tell them to clean up their lives and stop sinning. She tells them to sort of, basically love themselves in a really kind of profound way, because they don't. They being, white people. Okay, so that is... Obviously, there's so much more in this book. This was just kind of hopefully to get you thinking and to just hit some of the big themes that are important in this book, things that would be good to pay attention to. This class so far has been about violence, and we've talked about, and this book is sort of approaching violence in a much more kind of intimate way. Again, it's a novel about trauma. It's about the effect or the results of both singular violent acts with the killing of the child, but also systematized brutality in the form of slavery. And so it's doing something different than what we've seen some of our other texts do. It's really digging into the long-term effects of what this type of violence would have. The other texts we've read, like Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen and Blood Meridian, have kind of dealt with worlds and violence that is more immediate, like we're seeing the immediate effects. This is sort of playing the long game and showing you sort of how this could impact an entire people. The more specific Morrison is able to make her storytelling in a kind of weird way, the more sort of powerfully it speaks to this sort of grand experience, this grand tragic trauma of, American slavery. So that's that. I will have some questions up for you Wednesday again for you to respond to. So please do that. Obviously, if you have any questions, send me an email. Before we go, if there's one thing I've learned from watching videos on the internet, it's that they like lists and recommendations. And I know we are all, cooped up. I don't know about you, but going crazy. So if you liked Beloved, here are some of my suggestions for things to maybe seek out that maybe, depending on the aspect of Beloved you like, I think you might also like these things, and it will give you something to do. That's not sort of endlessly scrolling through Twitter and just growing more and more angry. So, to begin, just real quick, so this is a haunted house book, one of the greatest haunted house tales of all time, and I'm sure you've heard of it, is The Haunting of Hill House. It's not very long. If you haven't read this, you owe it to yourself to read it. It is amazing. Shirley Jackson is incredible. I don't know how she's not taught more because of how good she is. So this is the kind of perfect distillation of the haunted house. 4 people go in to sort of investigate this sort of ghostly presence in this house, and then it just goes from there. Netflix recently did a series, the miniseries, which is also fantastic. It's very different in terms of actual plot, between the two. This is like a single night thing with 4 people. The series takes place across, years. series is amazing as well. You should check it out. But if you're looking for something to read, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, amazing. Another classic haunted house tale that also has a very good movie adaptation is, of course, Stephen King's The Shining. Surely you've heard of this. I hadn't actually read this until last year, and it is really good. I like Stephen King a lot. I read a lot of his stuff. This book is incredible, and it holds up really well. This book is also about trauma. It's about Jack dealing with sort of his baggage. He's an alcoholic. He's been violent to his own son, but also like his students. He used to be a teacher, and this is like his last chance to sort of pull things together to go watch the Overlook Hotel during the winter. It's totally isolated, you know. Honestly, a terrible idea for anybody suffering from the kind of mental health issues he's suffering from. But anyway, the book is incredible. The film by Stanley Kubrick is also incredible, but notoriously Stephen King does not like it for reasons that are obvious if you actually read the book, because they are very different. You know, again, this is a story about sort of trauma and parenthood. Stanley Kubrick's film is kind of about the film in a way, like a lot of his films are about, like they're about almost themselves. I love Kubrick film. It's amazing. You should watch that as well. But the novel is its own special kind of thing, and definitely worth checking out. Finally, if you like Beloved, because you like the way that Morrison takes a horror trope and grounds it in the Black experience, specifically the African American experience, then I recommend The Ballad of Black Tom. This is by Victor LaValle, or Laval, I don't know. But this is also a really short book. Okay, you'd read this in a day or two. It's a novella. This is a retelling of H.P. Lovecraft's The Horror at Red Hook. Yeah. Told from the perspective of a sort of a black character. He's a musician, falls in with this weird dude who seems to be into some occulty things. He hires him to come play at his party. He wants some music going on. You know, rich white people stuff. And, you know, it gets weird. Anyway, it's really good. It's really creepy. It's got all the great Lovecraft stuff. You know, but it's a nice corrective to Lovecraft's like virulent racism and misogyny. He's just generally misanthropic. He did not like people in general, but especially you know, minority groups, black people, Jewish people. You know, he was the kind of racist that didn't like you if you were from like the wrong part of Europe, even if you were white, you know, but you know, it wasn't the greatest. Anyway, Victor LaValle, he was a black author, obviously influenced by Lovecraft, and he dedicates it to Lovecraft with all my conflicted feelings. He's really, really good. His other book, he's got several others, but his most recent is called The Changeling. That's also great. Anyway, so there you go. The Ballad of Black Tom, The Shining, The Haunting of Hill House. These are just some of my recommendations. If you find yourself enjoying Beloved, these books have some of those elements in there that I think you might enjoy also. Obviously, keep up with the reading. It's all in the syllabus. If you have any questions, send me an email. But otherwise, you know, stay safe, wash your hands, you know, keep your head up, all that stuff. We'll get through this. I would appreciate some feedback if you could on whether or not this helped you, or if you wanted me to do more of this or less of that, or talk more, talk less. You know, you won't hurt my feelings. Probably a little bit you will, but I'll get over it. It'll be through email, right? So it'll be less personal. Anyway, so yeah, have a great rest of your day.